Fantastic crowd for today's lecture. So hello and welcome to the Voices from the Hydrosphere lecture series presented here at the Oklahoma State University Museum of Art. Today we'll be featuring our exhibition artists, Marguerite Perret and Robin Lasser. My name is Christina Elliott, and I'm the Associate Curator of Education for Academic Initiatives here at the OSU Museum of Art. I will be your host for today's talk. I also have a number of other museum staff members here helping me moderate the chat. So we encourage you to introduce yourself or pose questions in the comments throughout the talk. We will address those at the end during a Q&A, and we will also allow everyone to unmute themselves and ask questions in real time during the Q&A as well. This lecture series was created to highlight the research and partnerships that were developed in our main gallery exhibition, The State We're in Water, Constructing a Sense of Place in the Hydrosphere. This is a multimedia and interactive arts-based research project that surveys our relationship to water regionally and globally. Our exhibition artists, Robin Lasser and Marguerite Perret, began their collaborative relationship a decade ago. They were inspired by a shared fascination with our waste stream. Their first art date took place at the wastewater treatment plant in Colorado. Robin Lasser produces films, photographs, site-specific installations, and public art dealing with environmental issues and social justice. In fact, the image behind me is one of Robin's. I think this was a collaborative piece actually between Robin and Marguerite. Robin is a 2009 Eureka Fellow and also a professor of art at San Jose State University. Robin exhibits her work nationally and internationally through university museums, galleries, art festivals, and international biennales. Marguerite Perret's work explores the spaces of art, science, healthcare, and personal experience. Investigating social issues through her studio practice, her work examines the promise, complications, and sometimes contradictory narratives inherent in art. She has collaborated with artists and researchers internationally with projects cited in Europe, South America, and throughout the US. Marguerite is also a professor of art at Washburn University, where she teaches foundation design, digital imaging, and contemporary art theory, as well as cross-disciplinary courses. Today, Marguerite and Robin will give us a closer look at two of the installation spaces in the exhibition. But you can also visit our museum website at www.museum.okstate.edu. You can visit our social media page or our YouTube page to see a full photo gallery of the exhibition, find out more about upcoming programming, or watch all of Robin's full-length films. This is the second artist talk our artists have given. So you can watch part 1 on our YouTube page and look forward to part 3 in the spring, although you do not have to watch any of these artists talk in chronological order in order to enjoy them and gain a broader understanding of their work. You can also visit the OSU Museum of Art. Our gallery is here in downtown Stillwater and is open to the public for walk-ins from Tuesday through Saturday from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. if you want to come see the exhibition in person. It will be up through May of 2021. So without further ado, I'm very pleased to host this talk with our artists, Marguerite Perret and Robin Lasser. And I believe Marguerite is kicking things off today.
Yes, thank you, Christina. I also want to note that I am going to be reading my notes today because we are very short on time, and I want to make sure that I don't start rambling, which I already started doing. So it's a pleasure to meet with everyone today. I am one of 3 artists who have worked on the State We're in exhibition. The other 2 are Robin, who you just heard about, and our other collaborator is Bruce Shirting. You will note that the subtitle is Constructing a Place in the Hydrosphere. Whether we live oceanside or by desert, our lives are shaped by and dependent on the surface and underground water resources and precipitation patterns in our region. Oh no, it's not, oh, there it goes, sorry. The state we're in, constructing a sense of place in the hydrosphere, is a multimedia and interactive arts-based research project that surveys the human relationship to water regionally and globally. It presents stories, images, and aesthetic experiences based on collaborations with community representatives, creatives, researchers, and citizen conservationists. Today, we will be discussing just 2 of the 6 museum galleries the project is occupying. I will start with the work in Gallery 3, which we have titled The Strangled Tangled Bank, located up here on the gallery planning map.
Nice,
okay.
impressive.
I got it. I have to click on it. I guess we should have tried that out before, sorry. Robin will follow with a discussion of the Weather Report Room project in the Melinda Berry Fisher Gallery. The Strangled and Tangled Bank is actually 4 bodies of work that explore different aspects of biological diversity and human impact on aquatic habitats. The title is taken from the famous excerpt from Darwin's Origin of Species that poetically summarized the theory of natural selection as a continuing cascade of endless forms, most beautiful and wonderful. Also in this slide is a view of my ceramic studio. Transmutation Still Life is a mixed media installation with porcelain slip cast, press molded, and ceramic burnout specimens of anthropogenic debris found along fresh waterways and lakes. In the tradition of a museum study collection, a variety of related objects are placed on low tables and on risers for inspection. These 10 tables each tell a different story or work from a different thematic premise. The addition of photographic images and didactic graphics add another layer of information and help situate the objects and reflect on human impact on water. The porcelain specimens on display appear to be in various states of decomposition. They are torn, broken, and ruptured, encrusted with nets and fibers, with casts of zebra mussels, worm and leech-like creatures, and suggestions of biofilms and other speculative macro and microscopic transplants and colonizers. In this slide, casts of fishing bobbers and zebra mussels, both might be considered invasive species, combined with invented textures and ceramic burnout of natural mosses sold for floral arrangements. One of the small table arrangements. What appears to be anemone-like creatures are patterns found in common ashtray designs. Here in the top right-hand image shows most of the layout for one of the larger tables. The graphic in the lower right and displayed with the black vest is a drawing by Francis Crick of the DNA double helix. Crick and Watson were awarded the Nobel Prize in Medicine in 1962 for this discovery. Another view of this table with additional graphics. The large image on the right is a stylized version of the X-ray crystallography of DNA, part of chemist Rosalind Franklin's own research that proved Crick and Watson's theory correct. Transmutation is an old word for changing one thing into another. It is often associated with alchemy, lead into gold, but it is also an expression for changing one species into another. Evolution became a more commonly used term sometime after Charles Darwin used it in the 6th edition of Origin of Species. Another variation of a porcelain cast vest with an image of the bronchial structure of the lungs and algae in the background. Life preservers are a recurring motif in the installation. These decaying, compromised, floating devices are not going to save us humans, but the algae might. It releases oxygen for us to breathe, and many species have potential as food sources, think nori wrapped sushi, or as biofuels. This table with images of marine and freshwater microalgae is with casts of deteriorating bumper buoys, plastic bottles, boating megaphones, and other cast-offs. Decals can be found on some of the porcelain sculptures. In this case, an image of a small frog captured in the biodiversity collections at the University of Kansas. 2 views of the same composition. Note the clear and stained image applied as a decal in the upper right-hand corner and the faux life forms in the display box created from plastic bottles on the bottom left. So Salt Preserves is an upcoming project. It is based on a visit to the Great Salt Plains State Park in Alfalfa County, Oklahoma, 5 miles north of the town of Jet. The installation highlights the notion of presence and absence. It refers to 2 time periods, the Permian, almost 260 million years ago, and the contemporary moment, which is often referred to as the Anthropocene or human era, in recognition of the human impact on the Earth's systems. This is a study for a proposed temporary environmental art installation. You can see visitors digging for the selenite crystals that form a few feet below the surface. The salt above dates back to an interior sea during the Permian era. In this digital sketch, the pink tubes act as both preservers and grave markers, referring to the designation of this area as a wildlife preserve and to the current and past extinction events. It is also a tribute to Christo and Jean Claude's environmental work, Surrounded Islands, that was placed in the Biscayne Bay, Greater Miami, Florida, 1980 to 83. Each of the rings memorializes one of the 5 recognized major deep time extinction events, including the Permian extinction, when 90 to 96% of all life on Earth disappeared. A 6th ring will note our current Holocene or Anthropocene extinction event. The holes left 2 visitors to the salt flats walk past a miniature tent and porcelain boat. The tent refers to the recreational opportunities offered by the park, and the boat to the ancient Permian Sea. The holes left behind from the selenite crystal diggers provide a perfect saline habitat for brine fly larvae. The larvae feed migrating birds like the snowy plover. The excavated mounded earth is used for nesting. These accommodations come with a snack bar. Multispectral Landscapes represent a collaboration with the Unmanned Systems Research Institute, part of the OSU Aerospace Engineering Program. This close-up displays some of the detail captured by especially equipped drones. Here, each black and white tonal image represents a data set specific to a particular wavelength of the electromagnetic spectrum. These images were made by taking multiple passes over the same area at Lake Carl Blackwell on July 15th and 19th, 2019. The artist's interpretation represents 5 wavelengths captured that day. Invisible to humans, near-infrared and far-infrared wavelengths are especially sensitive to plant growth and soil moisture, and multispectral imagery is often used in agriculture to determine the health of a crop. These images were created to better understand the effectiveness of mitigation efforts to control an infestation of yellow floating heart in the lake. The silhouettes in the background are based on photographs of the yellow floating heart overgrowth taken that same day as the drone surveillance. And here's another detail with beautiful, just beautiful. And here's the researcher's car caught by the drone. The next installation to be installed in this gallery is a collection of composite images featuring botanic specimens. The text presented in this installation is from the Hydrosphere, a famous 12th century Japanese literary work that is a meditation on the impermanence of all things in black, along with a complimentary quote in red to reflect the influence of climate change. Hydrophytes are plants that live in water. The species that form the inspiration for this series were photographed at the University of Kansas with a macro lens, one small section at a time, and those fragments of images were stitched together to create a large image with fine detail. All of these species are common to the upper and lower Midwest watersheds and wetlands. The backgrounds are various forms of plastics: ground plastic for recycling, plastic shopping bags, expanded polystyrene foam or EPS, and ethafoam. 80%, I was undervaluing it, 80% of ocean plastic comes from a land-based resource. wash downstream into the open seas or in the form of microplastics in our wastewater. Based on that data, it is reasonable to assume that the plastics are also of major concern in lakes and rivers and creeks. Maybe these plants are not so much hydrophytes, but instead they are plastophytes. And thank you. That is my portion of the program. Up next is Robin Lasser.
Thank you, Marguerite. You know, your work takes my breath away. I always enjoy how you create profound connections between people and non-humans and plant life, the connections between art and technology. So for myself, I'm a multimedia artist, and I most often work with storytelling. And in this light of storytelling, I worked with some of the community in Oklahoma. And in that quest, I met Sarah Hill. Now, Sarah Hill was she's the former Secretary of Natural Resources, and she's the current Attorney General for the Cherokee Nation. And when I interviewed her, Sarah said to me, "Robin, do you know how you get people to really care about water? And then when you care, you can possibly become one of the keepers of the watershed." And I said, "No, how, Sarah?" And she said, "You got to let people discover their personal connections with water." So I took Sarah up on that and have created a very personal story for this particular installation called The Weather Report Between Mother and Daughter. This installation is dedicated to Phyllis Lasser, the installation, who's my mom. The installation holds multiple tensions. The tensions brought about by global warming, longer droughts, rising seas, and stronger storms, as well as the incomprehensible tensions between mother and daughter, the mystery, the love, and the tears. The wall of images reflects sacred patterns as they form when rain strikes another body of water. The oval metal prints on the wall contain fragments of my mother's poetry, highlighted in a book we created together. The book is installed on the sculptural stand at the head of the room. This book collaboration is in honor of my 96-year-old mother. She wrote the poems included in this compendium in 1984. Realizing memories are fluid, Phyllis wrote her first poem, "I Still Love Old Fellows," to solidify her thoughts and feelings about her grandfather. From the point of touching pen to page, Phyllis wrote nonstop for 6 months and produced these poems, musings on the existential and intangible. Her works haunt and inspire. They connect our bodies to water and our souls to the universe. I began the photographic series included in this compendium while in Osaka, Japan in the fall of 2019 for our exhibition, Signaling Water, Multi-Species Migration and Displacement. However, our show was interrupted by a typhoon, and I began photographing the torrential rains falling into the sacred river Sumiyoshi that flows to the water temple in Osaka. When I returned from Osaka, I continued the rain imagery in the tidal zones of La Jolla, where I grew up. This work explores the relationship between nature, art, and spirituality by documenting the moment when rain ripples across another body of water. The imagery, when mirrored resembles the patterns we see utilized in art and architecture throughout time and around the world. While visiting my mother this past fall, we rediscovered these poems, which Phyllis wrote at nearly the same age as I am now. The two artists, mother and daughter, bonded over the shared sentiments of our work, produced at the same age in different eras, and we decided to collaborate at last. This is my mom's words. My words skim across the surface like skipping stones thrown into shallow pools, counting coup on the dead. I'm going to share with you the first 2.5 minutes of the film we created together.
There is a silence when the birds sleep. The earth breathes inside its skin, pores open, seeds and roots wander with unshod toes into quiet pools of river sand, swallowing its mirrors. The night balloons from its edges and pulls at brief moorings. We float through old barriers like minnows at high tide, swimming an expanded pool. Feathers forfeit color and loosen their grip of one to the other, molting breathlessly with the foliage, watching the shackled wind walk quietly toward the dawn. Branches absorb earth's moist unguents, swell to fullness, and bend low in hymn, gifting kisses as gladdened dewdrops, shimmering webs, spun to net beginnings and endings. In dreaming, we surrender to the motion of stillness. In silence, a vein of turquoise throbs the mountain. I wait to feel the shiver in a once struck bell. When I feel the verge, I talk first to myself, and then I write to my dead, ones who listen with ears transparent as still water and fluid as tears, behind unseeing eyes with open lids, always behind my own, watching. They listen to the color of lies, emitted through a veiled spectrum of white trust, locked in darkness. My dead have nothing to lose, having risked it all in life, holding another chance, to be felt in a smile, union's reunion, planted and taking instant root in every distant place, brought near for that brief moment when a smile flashes forth, and none has been deceived or grieved by separation.
The poetry in that film was read by actor, director, and UCSD professor Alan Schneider in 1984. The Rain Room installation holds the book, film, and large-scale photographs. Short poems are embedded into the remnants of rain ripples on these ovals. Wonder is wrapped in absorbent black. Death is closed eyes and another awakening. I felt I could peel the green mountain from the blue page and paste it someplace else. My mother and I had wanted to collaborate for almost 40 years. It took that time to discover exactly what the collaboration might be. This work explores the relationship between nature, art, and spirituality by documenting the moment when rain ripples across another body of water. The imagery, when mirrored, resembles the patterns we see utilized in art and architecture throughout time and around the world. While visiting my mother this past fall, we rediscovered these poems. Here we were looking at a cascade of aquarium marine waste flowing from a large pipe into the sea. I am standing behind the waterfall, looking out towards the sea in order to make this photograph. Here, I love the way the sky seems to open up, revealing a hole in the center of the atmosphere. Clouds contain water, the crashing sea waves, and shore. This piece, titled Gray Sea and Sky Dance, Clearing the Air as We Shelter in Place. It's a 30 by 45 inch archival dye-infused metal photograph. We simultaneously look down into the sea and up into the heavens. The cloud patterns created in this image remind me of the artwork displayed in the great domes in the chapels. This image is exhibited as a backlit 40 by 60 inch photograph. I stand in awe. How can rain striking water feel so much like glass? The patterns I recognize in these works reminds me of our human history of mark making, the collective imagination of people making natural patterns, marks in caves and in cathedrals, on the great walls of pyramids and mosques in the Middle East. Somehow, these works bring me into the collective imagination of our humanity throughout time and place. Rain recorded at the wetlands. This image also reminds me of sound waves. Wetlands serve to filter wastewater before the effluent enters the sea. This is one of my favorite of this series of work. The foam and suds in this photograph were stirred up during the first rainstorm in the tidal zone in La Jolla. The beach and the surrounding area flooded in the storm. Sea level rise and more violent storms characterize changes associated with climate change. Here my mother's poem comes to mind. Death is closed eyes and another awakening. Patterns created by water drops falling on the lake in my neighborhood remind me of the sometimes fatal mix of water and oil. It's uncanny how these abstractions reveal images of water plants surviving in the lake. Phyllis died during the pandemic, so only a few of us, due to the shelter-in-place mandate, could return home to be with her during her final few days. Phyllis ushered me into life. I pledged to see her through her death. In those final moments, I kissed her tenderly, and a smile formed radiant. The expression lasted just an instant, and then my mom died in my arms. Phyllis's smile is not all that flashed on April 24th, however. The unseasonably heavy rains that marked the photographic work done for this exhibition also created a nutrient-rich overflow into the sea. Plankton grew and the red tides followed. Those single-cell critters called dinoflagellates glow neon blue in response to energies in their space as a form of protecting themselves from predation. By day, the window of my mother's house looked out onto the red-brown waves, and by night, including the night of her death, we could see the blue glow of dinoflagellates in the sea, providing a light show send-off. My mother's spirit was released into the Pacific. I will close with a final 3 minutes of the film collaboration between my mother and myself.
My nights blister in dry dreaming of mudflats, once swollen with life's water, swimming tadpoles and tomboys on swift-moving rafts. It's time to bring a new song to this twilight, and sound it for each turn in the stone, facing west to cut moonbeams and starfalls, standing still and alone, being free in the desert to follow each trace in the sand of grains climbing hillocks and wind games, sand dune walking, time as breath does demand. The sounds of early birds and shore waves crowd the narrowing space left for dreaming. Images float lazily in unhurried dimness, without feet or gesturing arms, like so many players looking for something to be cast in. Dancing dames on night-slippered toes dance the memory knows, from other dreams on other stages with other shoes from other ages, the same dance still. I am an emission of light from the darkness of everything. I am an emission of light that reflects the absorption of all color. I am a result of consciousness. I am not the cause of it. I know all this only when I am. Then I also am not. Eyes closed, peering, silent inner hearing, bones and muscles nearing the empty well of selfless self, expanding out into, contracting in with everything. In the dawn, I drag in my net with its harvest from the ocean of sleep, the tiny disc-like mirrors sewn into the cloth of night, each reflecting its own image of the whole. I closed my eyes and went into the silence to hear. I closed my eyes to sharpen my focus of attention. I closed my eyes to reach the blackness of everything. I closed my eyes to help me see. I closed my eyes to help me hear. I closed my eyes to learn to feel and know everything. I closed my eyes to take in the light. I close my eyes, but not to sleep.
Thank you for standing witness with Marguerite and I through our journey of looking at and trying to understand and making metaphors along with the waters in the Oklahoma watersheds and extending from the Midwest to California and around the world globally. Thanks so much too for the OSU Museum of Art and all their staff. You're so fabulous. We were able to have an artist residency, and that's where we collected a lot of our original research. And you're doing exquisite outreach and working with us on lots of good workshops coming up in the future. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Robin and Marguerite, for giving us such great content to work with. It certainly makes my job enjoyable and a little bit easier when there's so much dynamic artwork that has multiple dimensions and layers to talk about. So let's take some questions and talk about some of these works a little bit more. I know we have some that have already come in through the chat. I am going to make sure that all of our participants are allowed to unmute themselves. So if you'd like to ask a question in real time, please feel free to do so. Maybe until we get our first live question. We'll pose this one from Chris Ramsey, unless Chris, you'd like to pose it yourself. All right, Chris says, this one is for Marguerite. Concerning some of the photographic works in the Strangled, Tangled Bank, have you taken microscopic photos of these water plants, kind of going a level deeper to reveal the existence of possible plastic particles within it? Or have you come across any sort of plastic particulates in any of these species that you've studied in different waterways?
I think that is the next project that would be really interesting to pursue. I was especially interested in going into the botanical collections at this time. I find, you can only present so much information, but I find that collections are a really amazing resource for kind of outlining how things like environments are changing, because something that was collected in 1970 and then doesn't exist there anymore, and you start to learn these things, and especially now that a lot of these institutions have all their collections online. But yeah, I have done microscopic photography before, so I think that would definitely be something that I would pursue next. And I appreciate that. That's a great question.
I've got a question here. It's for Robin, and this is from Casey. She asks, can you share your process for the Prussian blueprint photos?
The Prussian blueprint photos are a cyanotype process, and it's a way of coating papers. It can be watercolor or anything else, and exposing them out into the sunlight, and you can do photograms or work with negatives.
We have another question here for Marguerite from one of our education coordinators, Kat. I'm fascinated by your porcelain sculptures. I think we all are a little bit, especially if you work here. There's endless amount of things to look at in these sculptures. Can you elaborate more on the process, how it goes from being a found object to one of these shiny or textured ceramic objects? And can you expand on the use of glaze without burnout specimens?
Okay, I'll try. Yeah, it's, there's so much process in ceramics. Oh my gosh. I love process, so it's a good thing, but it takes a long time for you to go from the beginning of something to something that has more depth in the surface. Basically, it's just taking an object, any object, and you make a mold. And for instance, this is part of a mold for one of the life jackets. So then you set the mold up and you pour slip. You get used to when the right time is to dump the slip back out again, create a wall. Then you go to town working on it. So a lot of the things that I do, I don't like perfect representations of anything because of it's not what I'm trying to go for. So I deal with applying textures, and burnout is when you take a material that will burn out in the kiln but is not toxic, and you dip it in slip. I usually also apply some slip trailing, and then the material will burn out and it'll look like the thing that you started with. So some of that goes on these objects. It's very, very mixed process and technique. And then I do also, one thing that I use a lot that I really enjoy, I create colored clays. And I do this with I add mason stains to the clay. And that way I have in areas a color already in the clay, and then I add additional color, some of it matte, some of it glossy, some of it glazed. So yeah, it's so many techniques all together. I don't have a ceramics background, so I don't know not to do certain things. So I think that's actually the thing that frees me to do anything. And if it falls apart, I'm like, oh, I can use these pieces. And I take the pieces and I put them back into another piece. So it's just, it's all experimental all the time for me. And that's what keeps me interested.
I love getting the behind the scenes look into Marguerite's studio. It's wonderful. I have another question from Chris. This is to Robin. And he says, perhaps because I'm viewing your mandala videos about water on a screen that is partially moving due to a fan blowing in the room, it has made me wonder if you've ever projected your videos into water while it is raining. They are so absolutely meditative. Thank you.
Oh, thanks so much. That's a great question. You know, I do all kinds of projection mapping, most recently on a set of beautiful old alder trees and highlighting stories of migration. So it's almost as if the trees are talking to you. And one of the things that I love is to share a story, whether it's the tree sharing a story with a recent migrant from India, and or if it's a fish sharing story in the waterways. Here's the deal though about projection into water. If the water is shallow enough, and if there was a white surface below, you'd see the imagery. If not, that light would just be absorbed. But Chris, thank you. Now I'm re-motivated. I'm gonna go out, I think, right as the sun is setting tomorrow and give it a try in my local Lake Temescal. Great question.
Chris has another follow-up question, and I think this is directed to both of you, and I'm also very interested in this. This exhibition has been such a long time coming, and it's been a huge partnership between the both of you. So what is it like to work collaboratively, and what is your methodology?
Well, you know, we've worked together for over a decade. And often these kinds of research-based investigations really deserve that amount of time. And we've worked differently for each project. So I'm going to quickly share one of our first public art projects together, and then maybe I'll let Marguerite take it from there, you know, in terms of how she feels about the collaboration. First, I should say that always Marguerite is my inspiration for science. And so she often will take that role. I'm often working with narrative and stories. So more often than not, I'm collecting either audio stories or a video collection, even in terms of this work and my mother's poetry, right? But we're both working with a translation of science and social justice into our working process. We did one of my favorite, besides this particular show, work that we did together along with Bruce Scherting, is a Floating World, in which you saw that miniature tent that Marguerite showed at the beginning of her talk, that white tent. Well, that's just one of 30 emergency relief tents that we created, and we hung off of a bridge. So they were, thus the floating world with the water below. And in those tents, they lit up at night, creating a safe walkway for those leaving the train going into the city of San Jose. And when you walk by, they shared their stories with you, and they sung, and they chirped, and they shared the history of the lake below and the environmental and social conditions in the neighborhood. And in that case, we both worked hand in hand in almost all aspects of the project. In this project, we worked a little differently. Marguerite, would you like to talk about that?
Well, I guess what I would say is, yeah, we sometimes are working on the exact same piece, and sometimes we're working on pieces that are related to the theme, working together. And I also just really wanted to acknowledge that Bruce Scherting, who also happens to be my husband, and I have worked together even longer than we've worked together with Robin. And he does so much of, he has an MFA, and he has a background in working in museum exhibition design. And so that has been, both of those things have been so valuable to our projects as well, because he can work on projects that need a special attention to aesthetics, and then also come up with brilliant ideas for presentation. So I think that combination also has really added a lot to this project, and like the tables and certain aspects of how things are being presented, consultations with Bruce, and he's laid everything out for all the different galleries, and so that we could figure it out. So I think that's really good that we have this actually threesome of people working on this project who are really been a really dynamic combination. It's been great. I'd say the only, I think the only thing that I wish is that we could have done the in-person residency in April, as we were scheduled to do, because that would have really just been fantastic. But the museum's done such a great job working around all the limitations that everyone has faced.
We do hope to come together, Bruce, Marguerite, and I, in the spring, if this shelter-in-place mandate loosens, to work at the salt flats. So the big wall that Marguerite shared that highlighted that work, those are our initial stages. We're going to continue to do the research together, and then go on site and hopefully create the mock-up installation on site in the Great Salt Plains.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, so more to come. Like I said, this show will be up through May of 2021. And there are ongoing art making activities and speakers and events associated. So there will be new and exciting things integrated all the time with the exhibition, including the finalizing some of these last pieces that were delayed due to COVID, unfortunately. We have another question here that I was also kind of thinking of, so I might elaborate on Casey's question. She says, in researching our area here in Oklahoma, and particularly Stillwater, has anything surprised you? And so I guess, yeah, I'd say what was the most interesting thing maybe you found in some of your research or interviews, or maybe something shocking that you didn't expect to hear or see, or a statistic to find regarding water in this area?
You know, the one thing that I would say just right off the bat, and I'm sure Robin has other ideas too, but I was really surprised at how diverse a landscape Oklahoma is. That you can go from hilly, very green and wooded areas to areas that are flat, to the salt plains, to it's just amazing that it's like the whole country, like little patches of the whole country are in Oklahoma. So I had no idea of that, and I wanted to thank Scott Studley in Environmental Sciences, who took us around and showed us a lot of that when we were visiting in July. I think that was a really important thing for us to see.
Yeah, I fell in love with Oklahoma. I'm living here in Northern California in Oakland, but spending those 2 weeks investigating the watersheds with Scott and his students, just like my heart was pumping, and I thought, I've got to move here. One of my brothers is already living in Oklahoma City, so I thought, why not? But I think, one of the things that I learned, and what I think is very interesting about the state of Oklahoma, is so many of the lakes are human-made, right? Matter of fact, Christina, that image behind you was taken at the Blue River, and those sturgeon and the Blue River are one of the few wild rivers in Oklahoma. So if I'm thinking about Sarah Hill again, and I'm thinking about what she advised us all to do, think about our personal relationships with water, maybe go back to our childhood, get hooked, and then become one of the keepers of your own watershed.
I would also just put in one other thing. We did get to go and talk to some conservationists who are working to protect the Blue River and that whole area. And what I thought was really interesting is they talk a lot about how you can't go backwards. So you can't like go back to 1900, because where are you going to stop? I mean, so you're not trying to change that, and what you're trying to do is create sustainable systems within the world that we live in right now. And that was something that I guess I hadn't thought of quite in that same way before. So that was, I think, very important. And I enjoyed talking to them and learning how they're perceiving their role.
I think we barely have enough time for just one more question. There's, for both of you, we'd like to hear about a personal story that led you to focus on your work on water and nature and environmental issues.
Well, for me, I've been working for the past, giving away my age quite clearly, 30 years on environmental health and social justice issues. And you know why I started? I started off as a photographer. And when I was out in the landscape and I trained my lens on the world around me, how could I possibly ignore the changes that were happening in our planet? And I think now with climate change, we're reaching a tipping point, and it's like all hands on deck, right? So really, I had no choice, right? You always respond to the world around you, and everywhere I work, I discover people that I fall in love with. So again, I have no choice but to want to provide a vehicle to hold their really important stories and reflections about how they deal with the environment and the social justice that surrounds their lives.
Yeah, I would say I was always attracted to being by bodies of water. I grew up on the East Coast between right outside of New York City, in New Jersey, and then also in Connecticut on the Long Island Sound. So there was always water, and I spent a lot of time fussing around in the back areas, not so much being a beach person and laying on the beach, but being really interested in nature and looking at some of those more marshy areas and looking for little critters in there. So I spent a lot of time doing that in my childhood. But also being from that area in New Jersey, it exploded in population while I was growing up. And it also pushed out a lot of the nature was developed, and a lot of my personal town that I grew up in was changed over. And I think that really impressed me a lot as I grew into adulthood and started thinking about the content that I wanted to pursue. And I feel that Robin and I have this amazing role as educators, where we're able to work with students. Now it's like getting into multiple generations of students, but students, and talk to them about their concerns and how they see their future. And I am very impressed, I have to say. I think the millennials and these are such dumb names for people, but the millennials and generation like Z, like what's after Z? I don't understand that one either, but I think they are so aware, and they are so committed to making changes. And I am just so impressed. My students are brilliant, and I just want to be there and help them.
And I was hoping to say one last thing. I see my father, who's going to have his 97th birthday, here with us today. And I love you, Dad.
Is this Elliot Lasser I see here? Elliot, what a fine name. One of my favorite names. And so happy birthday from the whole museum. And thank you all for attending today's lecture. We know a lot of you are sort of watching on your lunch breaks or synchronistically zooming in with your classes. So we're going to try to round this out at the hour mark. But thank you for attending. We hope that you can also attend the next sessions in this series. And we had a bank of fantastic questions here. So I would remind everyone that you can find the first part of their artist talk through our webpage or through our YouTube. In that part of the artist talk, Marguerite and Robin did specifically talk about growing up next to waterways on the West Coast and the East Coast, how water really impacted the formation of their being as artists. They also detail a number of collaborative projects they did before the state were in water. And they go into a lot of detail as to what OSU scientists and researchers, as well as a number of community members they interviewed as part of their arts-based research. And so we had a lot of questions about some of those aspects. And so there is another hour-long talk based on those specific points. That is the first part. So I hope that you'll watch it in order to get more information. Our next artist series, Voices of the Lecture series will feature Luann Fisher on November 5th. Luann Fisher is from the city of Stillwater and will speak about wastewater treatment and the human component. To register for these Zoom webinars, please visit our website at www.museum.okstate.edu to sign up. You can also find all of our museum staff contact information on our webpage. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to reach out to us. I'd like to take this time to thank all of our partners in helping build this series. Many different departments and organizations here at OSU helped us in collaborating. So thanks to Allied Arts, the Oklahoma Water Resources Center, the Ferguson College of Agriculture, the Center for Sovereign Nations, the Edmund Lowe Library, the OSU College of Engineering, Architecture, and Technology, the OSU Art Department, and OSU's Office of the Vice President for Research. So thank you everyone for making this such a successful exhibition and lecture series. We hope you have a wonderful afternoon, and remember to join us next time, and you can always follow up any comments with us through email.